What if one desperate moment changed everything you thought you knew about kindness? Eleanor Chen stood frozen outside the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. She'd come to this charity gala hoping to find help, clutching a wrinkled envelope that held her grandmother's last hope. But now, watching the glittering crowd through the glass doors, she felt impossibly small. Then she saw him, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, silver threading through his dark hair, walking with the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without thinking. She didn't know his name, didn't know that every person in that room either feared him or owed him something. All she knew was that two men in cheap suits were pushing through the crowd behind her, getting closer, and she had nowhere left to run. So Eleanor did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed his arm and whispered, "Please, act like you know me. Where are you watching from tonight?" The man's arm was solid beneath Eleanor's trembling fingers, and for a heartbeat, she felt him tense. She'd grabbed onto someone important. That much was clear from the way conversations seemed to pause in ripples around them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over her face before glancing past her shoulder to where the two men had stopped. Uncertain now, watching from across the lobby. "Smile," he said quietly, his voice carrying a strange gentleness that didn't match the steel in his posture. "And don't let go." Eleanor managed something that might have passed for a smile, though her whole body was shaking. She'd been so careful for weeks, so cautious, but they'd found her anyway. Her grandmother's medical bills had piled up until Eleanor had made a terrible choice. Borrowed money from the wrong people who didn't care that she was trying to save the only family she had left. Now those people wanted their payment, and Eleanor had nothing left to give. The man guided her smoothly through the ballroom doors, his hand settling lightly at her back as if they'd arrived together. The crowd parted naturally, and Eleanor caught fragments of whispered conversations falling silent as they passed. She noticed the way people's eyes followed him, the careful distance they maintained, the mix of respect and something else in their expressions. Fear, maybe, or awe. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Eleanor," she whispered back. "Eleanor Chen." "Vincent Russo," he said, and she felt his hand tighten just slightly against her back. "Those men outside, why are they following you?" Eleanor's throat closed up. She couldn't tell this elegant stranger that she'd been stupid enough to trust a loan shark, that her grandmother was dying of cancer, and the hospital bills had swallowed every penny she'd saved from her job at the bookstore. She couldn't admit that she'd come here tonight, because someone had told her that wealthy donors sometimes helped people at these events. That she'd been standing outside working up the courage to walk in and beg. "I made a mistake," she finally managed. "I borrowed money I can't pay back." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Around them, the gala continued its glittering dance. Women in evening gowns laughed softly over champagne. Men in expensive suits discussed business and golf. A string quartet played something classical and soothing in the corner. None of them knew that Eleanor's whole world was crumbling, that her grandmother had maybe weeks left, that those men outside would hurt her if Vincent let go. "How much?" Vincent asked. $30,000, Eleanor said, and the number sounded even more impossible spoken aloud. "But I didn't come here to ask for money, I swear. I thought maybe someone would know about programs or foundations or something that could help with my grandmother's treatment." They'd reached a quieter corner of the ballroom now, partly hidden by an elaborate arrangement of white roses. Vincent studied her with an intensity that made Eleanor want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. She'd already thrown herself on his mercy by grabbing his arm. She had nothing left to lose by being honest. "Your grandmother," he said. "What's wrong with her?" "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," Eleanor said, and her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "The doctors say she has maybe a month, maybe less. But there's an experimental treatment. It's not covered by insurance, and it costs—" She stopped, overwhelmed suddenly by the impossibility of everything. Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. "The men outside, they work for Tommy DeLuca?" Eleanor blinked, surprised. Yes. "How did you—" "Stay here," Vincent said. He stepped away before she could respond. moving through the crowd with that same quiet authority. Eleanor watched him approach a group of men near the bar, watched the way their expressions changed when he spoke to them, watched one of them pull out a phone and make a call. 3 minutes later, one of the men headed toward the exit. Vincent returned to her side. "They're gone. They won't bother you again." Eleanor stared at him, confused and dizzy with relief and fear all tangled together. "I don't understand." Who are you?" But before Vincent could answer, a woman's voice cut through the music, sharp and cold as winter rain. "Vincent, darling." A blonde woman in a red dress that probably cost more than Eleanor's car glided over to them, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I didn't know you were bringing a guest tonight." The way she said guest made it clear she meant something else entirely. Vincent's expression remained neutral. "Margaret, lovely to see you." Margaret's eyes raked over Eleanor, taking in her simple blue dress from the department store clearance rack, her bargain shoes, her lack of jewelry. "How charming," she said, and Eleanor felt herself shrinking under that dismissive gaze. "Another one of your charity cases, Vincent?" And that's when Eleanor realized something that made her blood run cold. Whatever kindness Vincent had shown her, whatever protection he'd offered, everyone here seemed to know exactly what kind of man he was. And from the way Margaret was looking at her, Eleanor understood that she'd just grabbed onto someone far more dangerous than the men she'd been running from. Vincent's hand settled firmly on Eleanor's elbow, a gesture that looked courteous but felt like a clear warning to Margaret. "If you'll excuse us," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that made even Margaret step back, her smile turning brittle. As they walked away, Eleanor's mind raced. Charity case. Margaret had called her a charity case, but there'd been something knowing in her tone, something that suggested Vincent Russo made a habit of helping people. Or maybe controlling them. Eleanor had read enough crime novels to recognize the type. Wealthy, powerful, connected to things that didn't bear close examination. She'd just thrown herself at the mercy of someone who might be worse than her original problem. "You're scared," Vincent observed as they stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the city lights. The spring air was cool against Eleanor's flushed skin. "You're wondering what kind of man can make 2 thugs disappear with a phone call." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm grateful," she said carefully. "But yes, I'm wondering." Vincent leaned against the railing, and for the first time that evening, Eleanor saw something almost like weariness cross his features. He looked older out here, away from the ballroom. Lights maybe mid-50s with lines around his eyes that spoke of years of careful decisions and heavy burdens. "My father ran a business," Vincent said. "Import, export, some construction, some real estate. It wasn't always clean, the way he ran things. When he died 15 years ago, I inherited all of it, the legitimate parts and the parts that lived in shadows." He glanced at her. "I've spent those 15 years trying to make things right. Cleaning up operations, helping the families that my father's business hurt, making sure the next generation doesn't have to live the way we did." Eleanor listened, her fear slowly morphing into something more complicated. "The men following me. Tommy DeLuca runs a loan sharking operation that my father used to protect," Vincent said. "After I cut ties with that world, Tommy started working for himself. Smaller, meaner, the kind of man who'd threaten a bookstore clerk trying to save her dying grandmother." His jaw tightened. "I still have enough pull to make sure he leaves you alone. Your debt is gone, Eleanor. He won't come for you again." The words should have filled her with relief, but instead, Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Eleanor's chest ache. 23 years ago, my wife Maria needed an experimental cancer treatment. We had money, but not the kind that mattered. Not the connections to the right doctors. Not the pull to get her into the trials. I was young, desperate, and my father's business was everything I'd tried to escape from. But for Maria, I went back. I made deals, did things I'm not proud of, got her into that program." He paused. "She lived another 18 months. We had one more Christmas together, one more spring watching the cherry blossoms. And when she died, She made me promise something. Eleanor found herself holding her breath. She made me promise that I'd use whatever power I had to help people who couldn't help themselves, Vincent said. That I'd never walk past someone drowning without throwing them a rope. He turned to look at Eleanor then, and she saw genuine pain in his eyes. So when a young woman grabs my arm and asks me to act like I know her, I remember Maria. I remember being the desperate one, and I help. The tears spilled over then, and Eleanor didn't try to stop them. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, Vincent said gently. You trusted me enough to ask. He pulled a business card from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. That has my assistant's number. Call her tomorrow morning. We'll arrange for your grandmother's treatment, whatever she needs. Eleanor stared at the card, then back up at Vincent. I can't. That's too much. I could never repay you. I'm not asking you to, Vincent said. That's the point. He smiled then, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, almost vulnerable. But maybe when your grandmother gets better, you'll think about paying it forward. Help someone else who's drowning. That's all Maria ever wanted from me. That's how we make the world a little less dark. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. They stood there on the balcony for a while longer, not speaking, just letting the weight of the evening settle around them. Eleanor thought about her grandmother, asleep in that sterile hospital room, fighting so hard to stay alive. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake wondering how to save her, all the dead ends and closed doors. And she thought about Maria, a woman she'd never met, whose final gift was reaching across the years to save someone else's grandmother. I should go, Eleanor finally said, back to the hospital. I want to tell her, her voice broke. I want to tell her that maybe we have more time. Vincent nodded. I'll have my driver take you. He hesitated, then added, and Eleanor? Those men are gone, but the world is still full of sharks. Be careful who you trust. As they walked back through the ballroom, Eleanor felt the stares again, but they didn't frighten her anymore. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. She'd found a miracle tonight in the most unexpected place, wrapped up in the guise of a man the world probably feared. But then, as they reached the lobby, Eleanor noticed something that made her stomach drop. A man in a dark suit stood near the exit, and when he saw Vincent, his expression shifted from casual to alert. He whispered something into a radio at his wrist, and suddenly 3 more men in dark suits appeared from different corners of the hotel. Vincent's hand tightened on Eleanor's arm, his entire body going tense in a way that terrified her, because these men weren't from Tommy DeLuca's crew. They moved with military precision, with badges barely visible under their jackets, and they were walking straight toward Vincent Russo. FBI, Vincent said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from him. Don't say anything, Eleanor. Let me handle this. But the lead agent, a weathered man with gray at his temples and tired eyes, walked past Vincent and stopped directly in front of Eleanor. Miss Chen, I'm Agent Douglas Hartley. We've been looking for you. Eleanor's mind went blank with confusion and fear. What? Why would you? I haven't done anything. We know, Agent Hartley said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. We know about the loan from Tommy DeLuca, and we know you were being threatened. We've been building a case against DeLuca's operation for 8 months. When we got word tonight that you'd shown up here, that DeLuca's men were following you. He glanced at Vincent, and Eleanor couldn't read the expression that passed between them. We need to talk to you about what happened. Vincent stepped forward, placing himself partly between Eleanor and the agents. She's protected. DeLuca won't touch her again. With respect, Mr. Russo, Agent Hartley said. That's exactly what we need to discuss. Because 3 witnesses saw you make a phone call, saw one of your associates leave this building, and 20 minutes later, DeLuca's men received a call ordering them to back off. We can't have civilians, even well-intentioned ones, interfering with an active investigation. Eleanor felt the pieces clicking together, and with them came a crushing wave of understanding. Vincent had helped her, yes, but in doing so he'd used connections that law enforcement was actively investigating. She'd pulled him into something that could have serious consequences. It's my fault, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. I grabbed his arm, I asked for help. He didn't know anything about your investigation. Please, don't blame him for— Miss Chen? Agent Hartley interrupted, not unkindly. Mr. Russo knew exactly what he was doing. He's made these kinds of calls before. He looked at Vincent again, and Eleanor saw something like regret in the agent's eyes. Vincent, you know we can't ignore this. You've been walking a very fine line for years, and tonight you crossed it. Vincent's expression remained calm, but Eleanor saw his jaw tighten. What do you want, Doug? The use of the first name made Eleanor realize these two men had a history, a complicated one judged by the tension in the air. Agent Hartley sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. We want you to testify against DeLuca. Tell us how his operation works, who he's connected to, how he enforces his debts. You've been distancing yourself from that world for years. This is your chance to close the door completely. And if I refuse? Then we have to assume you're still part of the problem, Agent Hartley said. And Miss Chen becomes a witness to an obstruction of justice charge that we don't want to file but will have to. Eleanor felt sick. She'd come here desperate to save her grandmother, and instead, she'd dragged a good man into legal jeopardy. No, she said. Agent Hartley, please. He was just being kind. He told me about his wife, about Maria, about how he promised to help people. Agent Hartley's expression softened. I know about Maria, he said quietly. I knew her, actually. She was a good woman. And Vincent, you've done a lot of good since she died. We've watched you transform your father's business, seen you help dozens of people get out of bad situations. But you can't keep operating in the gray areas. At some point, you have to choose which side you're on. Have you ever faced something like this? A moment where doing the right thing put you or someone else at risk? Let us know in the comments. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on Eleanor's arm, protective despite everything. Finally, he said, If I testify, Eleanor's grandmother gets the treatment she needs. All of it, fully funded, no strings attached. And Eleanor doesn't get dragged into any of this. No testimony, no exposure, nothing that puts her at risk from anyone connected to DeLuca. Vincent, you don't have to— Eleanor started, but he shook his head. Yes, I do, he said. And when he looked at her, Eleanor saw the same determination she'd heard in his voice when he talked about Maria. That's what she made me promise. To help people, no matter the cost. He turned back to Agent Hartley. Those are my terms. Agent Hartley studied Vincent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed. Miss Chen walks away free and clear, and we ensure her grandmother receives the best care available. He glanced at his team. But Vincent, you understand what testifying means? DeLuca has connections. People who won't appreciate you turning witness. I've lived with worse threats, Vincent said. When do we start? As the agents began discussing logistics, Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face again. This stranger, this complicated man with his dangerous past and his good heart, was risking everything because she'd grabbed his arm in a moment of panic. Because his wife had asked him to help people, and he'd never stopped trying to keep that promise. Thank you, she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. Vincent squeezed her arm gently. Thank Maria, he said. She's the one who made this choice possible 23 years ago. 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat in the hospital cafeteria nursing lukewarm coffee, exhausted but more hopeful than she'd felt in months. Her grandmother had started the experimental treatment, and while it was too early to know if it would work, the doctors were cautiously optimistic. The tumors had stopped growing. That was something. That was everything. She'd tried to call Vincent twice since that night, but his assistant had politely told her he was unavailable, dealing with legal matters. Eleanor understood. She read the newspapers, saw the coverage of the federal case against Tommy DeLuca and his loan sharking operation. Vincent's testimony had been sealed from the public, but sources said a key witness with connections to organized crime had provided devastating evidence. Eleanor worried about him constantly. Wondered if he was safe, if he regretted helping her. You look tired, sweetheart. Eleanor looked up to find her grandmother standing there, leaning on her walker but smiling, Lily Chen had always been small, but the cancer had made her seem almost translucent. Now, though, there was color in her cheeks, and her eyes had that familiar spark of mischief, Grandma. "You're supposed to be resting," Eleanor said, standing quickly to help her into a chair. "I've been resting for weeks," Lily said with a dismissive wave. "I needed to see the sky, feel like a human being again." She studied Eleanor with the sharp perception that had always made it impossible to hide anything from her. "You've been worried about something besides me. I can tell." Eleanor hesitated, then found herself telling the whole story, the loan, the panic, grabbing Vincent's arm, everything that had followed. She hadn't wanted to burden her grandmother with it before, but now, with Lily sitting there looking stronger than she had in months, the words spilled out. When Eleanor finished, Lily was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands wrapped around the tea Eleanor had gotten her. "This Vincent," she finally said, "he sounds like someone who understands about debts. Not the money kind, but the other kind. The ones we owe to people we loved and lost." "He kept his promise to his wife," Eleanor said, "even though it's costing him so much." "Love does that," Lily said softly. "Real love doesn't end with death. It just changes shape, becomes the choices we make, the kindness we show to strangers." She reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. "Your grandfather died when you were 3. You don't remember him, but every day I wake up and make choices based on what he taught me about being decent, about helping others. That's how love persists." Eleanor squeezed her grandmother's hand, feeling tears threaten again. "I'm so glad you're here, Grandma. I'm so glad you're fighting." "Well, that treatment you somehow got me into is giving me a fighting chance," Lily said with a small smile. "So I'd like to meet this Vincent Russo someday, if he'll let an old lady thank him properly." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Vincent. I'm testifying today. Wanted you to know everything's going to be okay. How's your grandmother?" Eleanor's hands shook as she typed back. "She's doing better. Thank you. For everything. Are you safe?" The response came quickly. "Safe enough. The FBI has been helpful. Case should wrap up soon." Then after a pause, "There's something I want to tell you. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a park near the hospital, Oak Grove, 2 p.m. Eleanor showed her grandmother the messages, and Lily's expression turned thoughtful. "You should go," she said. "I have a feeling this man has more to say than he managed at that gala." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. That night, Eleanor lay awake, thinking about Vincent's message, wondering what he wanted to tell her. The next afternoon, she arrived at Oak Grove Park 15 minutes early, her stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. The park was beautiful in the spring sunlight, dogwood trees blooming white and pink, children playing on the swings while their parents watched from nearby benches. Vincent appeared exactly at 2 o'clock, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt instead of the expensive suit. He looked tired but somehow lighter, as if some long-carried burden had eased. "Eleanor," he said, smiling warmly. "Thank you for coming." "How's Lily?" "Stronger," Eleanor said. "The doctors are amazed at how well she's responding. They say she might have years, not months." "I'm so glad." Vincent gestured to a bench overlooking a small pond, and they sat down together. For a moment, he just watched the ducks paddling across the water. Then he said, "I testified this morning. The whole thing. Everything I knew about DeLuca, about the people he worked with, the way his operation functioned. It felt like finally putting down something I've been carrying since my father died." "Are you in danger?" Eleanor asked. "The FBI has offered protection, but honestly, I think DeLuca's organization is finished. My testimony, combined with evidence from other witnesses, it's over for him." Vincent turned to look at her. "But that's not what I wanted to tell you." Eleanor waited, her heart beating faster. "When you grabbed my arm that night," Vincent said slowly, "when you asked me to act like I knew you, I realized something. I've spent 15 years helping people from a distance, writing checks, making calls, fixing problems, but never really connecting. I'd convinced myself that's what Maria wanted. That's how I kept my promise." He paused, his voice rough with emotion. "But watching your face when I told you about the treatment, seeing your love for your grandmother, I remembered what it felt like to love someone that much, to fight that hard, and I realized I'd been half alive since Maria died." "Vincent, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not trying to. This isn't about romance or anything inappropriate. You're young enough to be my daughter. But I want to know you, Eleanor. I want to be in your grandmother's corner for however long she has. I want to meet the person you helped me remember I could be. Someone who doesn't just help from behind walls, but actually shows up. Actually connects." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Would that be okay?" Eleanor found herself smiling through her own tears. "I think my grandmother would love that," she said. "And so would I." 4 months passed, and summer turned Oak Grove Park into a green cathedral of shade and sunlight. Eleanor pushed Lily's wheelchair along the path, pointing out the family of swans that had made their home by the pond. Lily was having a good day, her eyes bright and alert, her hands steady as she held the bag of breadcrumbs they'd brought to feed the ducks. Vincent walked beside them, carrying a picnic basket and telling a story about his teenage years that made Lily laugh so hard she had to catch her breath. Over the months, he'd become something like family, not a replacement for anything they'd lost, but a new kind of relationship that defied easy categories. He was mentor and friend, honorary uncle and fellow traveler. He showed up for Lily's doctor appointments, brought Eleanor books from estate sales he visited, and joined them for Sunday dinners that stretched long into the evening as they talked about everything and nothing. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone dared hope. Lily's tumors had shrunk significantly, and while the doctors cautioned that cancer was unpredictable, they'd started using words like remission and long-term survival. Lily had responded by making plans: a trip to see the Grand Canyon, learning to paint, volunteering at the literacy center where Eleanor worked. "I lost so much time being sick," she'd told Eleanor one morning. "I don't want to waste what I've been given." As they spread the picnic blanket under an old oak tree, Eleanor thought about how much had changed since that panicked moment at the gala. Tommy DeLuca was in federal prison, his organization dismantled. Vincent had fully divested from what remained of his father's questionable businesses, focusing now on legitimate real estate development and a foundation he'd established in Maria's name to help families facing medical crises. And Eleanor had found her voice in ways she never expected. Vincent had encouraged her to share her story, to speak at fundraisers for the foundation about the fear and desperation that had driven her to that loan shark, about the miracle of finding help when she most needed it. At first, she'd been terrified of public speaking, but Lily had reminded her that vulnerability was strength, that her story could help other people feel less alone. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Lily said as they ate sandwiches and watched clouds drift across the blue sky. "That night Eleanor grabbed your arm, Vincent. What if she'd been too scared? What if she'd just let those men follow her, tried to handle it alone?" Vincent smiled, but Eleanor saw the shadow that crossed his face. "I think about that too," he admitted. "How many people I've walked past in my life who were drowning but didn't ask for help. How many Eleanors I didn't see because I wasn't paying attention." "But you saw me," Eleanor said softly. "And you didn't just see, you acted. You kept your promise to Maria, and it saved my grandmother's life." "You saved your own grandmother," Vincent corrected, "by being brave enough to ask a stranger for help, by trusting that there was still kindness in the world." He looked at Lily. "And if you want to know the truth, you've both saved me too. Reminded me why I do this work, why Maria's promise mattered. Gave me a family again when I'd forgotten what that felt like." Lily reached over and patted his hand, and Eleanor saw tears in her grandmother's eyes. "We're a strange little family," Lily said, "brought together by panic and kindness and an experimental cancer treatment, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." They sat there for a long time, talking about Lily's plans for the future, about Eleanor's idea to go back to school for her master's degree, about Vincent's hopes for expanding the foundation. Around them, the park buzzed with life. Children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly men playing chess at the stone tables. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, and somehow that ordinariness felt precious, miraculous even. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eleanor helped Lily back into her wheelchair. Vincent walked with them to Eleanor's car, carrying the empty picnic basket. "Same time next Sunday?" he asked. "Actually," Lily said, "I was hoping you'd come for dinner this week. I'm making my mother's recipe for braised short ribs, and I need someone to appreciate my cooking besides my granddaughter." "I would be honored," Vincent said, and Eleanor could tell he meant it. After they'd helped Lily into the car and loaded the wheelchair, Vincent pulled Eleanor aside for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me into your lives, for showing me what Maria's promise really meant." "Thank you for keeping that promise," Eleanor said, "for being the kind of person who sees someone drowning and throws them a rope." Vincent smiled, and in that smile, Eleanor saw echoes of the man who'd helped a desperate stranger at a gala 4 months ago, but also someone newer, softer, more at peace. "We throw each other ropes," he said. "That's how we all stay afloat." As Eleanor drove her grandmother home, the setting sun warmed through the windows. She thought about chains of kindness extending backward and forward through time. Maria helping Vincent see what mattered. Vincent helping Eleanor save Lily. And someday, Eleanor knew she would help someone else who was drowning, and the chain would continue, unbroken by death or time or anything else the world could throw at them. "You're quiet," Lily observed. "Just thinking about miracles," Eleanor said. "And how sometimes they wear expensive suits and have kind eyes," Lily laughed softly. "Sometimes they wear bargain dresses and grab strangers' arms when they're terrified. Sometimes they're stubborn grandmothers who refuse to give up," Eleanor added. They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, and when Eleanor helped Lily inside, she noticed the evening light catching on a photograph on the mantel, one Vincent had given them last month. It showed Maria in a garden somewhere, smiling at whoever held the camera, looking young and healthy and impossibly alive. Beneath the frame, Vincent had written in careful script, "Love persists, always." If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts about how kindness can change everything, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of hope, connection, and the small miracles that happen when we're brave enough to ask for help. Thank you for joining us on Eleanor, Lily, and Vincent's journey. May you always have the courage to throw someone a rope, and the wisdom to grab one when you need it most.